In 2012, FBI investigators sat inside a quiet interrogation room. And across the table from them, sat a man who looked completely ordinary. He spoke calmly, almost casually, like a man who had absolutely nothing to hide. But what he was about to reveal would disturb even the most experienced investigators. Because hidden in forests across the United States, small containers had been buried underground. Years ago. Inside them were restraints, cash, and tools capable of causing serious harm. But one detail disturbed investigators the most. Those containers had been buried long before any crime was ever reported. Which meant the man sitting across from them hadn't acted on impulse. He hadn't reacted. He had been preparing quietly for years. And the story of how those preparations were finally discovered began on a cold night in Alaska. An 18-year-old named Samantha Koenig was finishing her shift at a roadside coffee stand in Anchorage. It was late, the streets were mostly empty, just another quiet night. A man walked up to the window. At first he looked like a normal customer. Then he pulled out a weapon and forced Samantha to leave the stand with him. It happened fast, so when the next customer drove up, the window was open, the lights were still on, but Samantha was gone. At first customers thought she had stepped away for a moment. But she never came back. Within hours, police were called. Officers arrived and began examining the stand. Inside Samantha's belongings were still there, her purse, her phone, her car keys, which meant one thing, she hadn't left voluntarily. Investigators started checking nearby security cameras. One camera captured a man approaching the stand. Later, the same man could be seen leaving the area. The footage wasn't clear enough to make a positive identification, but it confirmed something important. Someone had taken Samantha. The case quickly spread across Anchorage. Search teams began combing nearby areas. Volunteers joined the effort. Flyers appeared across the city. Everyone hoped Samantha would be found safe, but days passed, with no answers. Then something unexpected happened. Weeks after Samantha disappeared, a message appeared online. It was a ransom demand, and it came with something that stopped investigators cold: a photograph. In the photo, Samantha was holding a recent newspaper. Proof she was still alive. For her family, that photo was both a relief and a nightmare at the same time. She was alive, but someone was holding her, and that someone wanted money. Her family worked closely with investigators. The plan was to follow the instructions, make the drop, and track whoever came to collect. The money was placed exactly where the message described. Then investigators pulled back, and waited. Not long after, someone arrived, grabbed the cash, and disappeared before anyone could close in. For a moment, it looked like another dead end, but then, one detail changed everything. Samantha's debit card was used, not in Alaska, but thousands of miles away. The card was used at an ATM, in Texas. Investigators immediately locked onto the activity. Security cameras near the ATM captured the person using the card. For the first time, investigators had a clear image of the suspect, a tall man, calm, completely ordinary looking. The kind of person most people pass on the street without a second glance. But investigators noticed something else. The man was driving a white pickup truck. And that truck was about to lead them straight to a name. Investigators ran the plates. The truck was registered to a man named Israel Keys. At first glance, nothing about him raised any flags. He worked construction. He had lived in several different states over the years. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, reliable, the kind of neighbor you never think twice about. But then investigators looked closer. Keys had been traveling, a lot, across multiple states. And the timing of those trips lined up directly with Samantha's disappearance. Police in Texas found the truck and began surveillance. When officers finally pulled the vehicle over during a traffic stop, Keys didn't panic. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He stayed perfectly calm. Inside the vehicle, investigators found Samantha's debit card. That was enough. He was placed under arrest and taken in for questioning, and that is how investigators ended up sitting across from him, in that quiet interrogation room. At first, Keys answered carefully. He chose his words slowly, avoided anything specific. Sometimes he just stayed silent and let the question hang in the air. But investigators noticed something that made them deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't nervous. Most people in that room sweat. They fidget, they talk too much or go completely quiet from fear. Keys did none of that. He sat there, relaxed, almost like he was in control of the conversation. And then, the interrogation took a turn no one expected. Keys began to talk. Not about Samantha. About something else entirely. He described road trips he had taken, across the country over the year, alone, to remote locations, forests, parks, isolated areas far from any city. During those trips, he said, he had buried containers underground. Investigators would later call them kill kits. Each container held everything he would need to commit a violent crime. Weapons, restraints, cash, tools, All of it sealed and buried, sometimes years before he ever planned to use it. The idea behind it was calculated. If the tools were already buried at the location, he never had to travel with anything suspicious. No weapons in the car, nothing to explain if he was ever pulled over, nothing connecting him to anything, just a man on a road trip. Investigators sat in silence as he explained this. Because what he was describing wasn't a crime of passion, it wasn't impulsive, it was architecture, a system he had designed, tested, and refined over years, built specifically to be invisible. And for a long time, it had worked perfectly. Eventually Keyes gave investigators enough to begin searching. Teams went out to remote areas across the country. And in several locations, they found exactly what he described. Buried containers, restraints, weapons, cash. Some of them had been in the ground for years, placed there long before anyone had ever heard the name, Israel Keyes. But here is what made investigators lose sleep. Keyes never gave them everything. When asked where specific containers were buried, he would shift, change the subject, go vague, sometimes smile. But investigators still had one more question. The question that started everything: where was Samantha? Keyes knew, and for weeks, he used that information like a bargaining chip, slowly giving details, then pulling back, playing a game only he controlled, until finally, he told them enough. Samantha's remains were recovered from a lake in Alaska. She was 18 years old, she had dreams, a family, a whole life ahead of her. And it ended at a coffee stand window, on a quiet night, in a matter of minutes. Her family had waited months for answers, and when those answers came, they were the ones no family ever wants to receive. Then on December 2, 2012, while sitting alone in his jail cell in Anchorage, Israel Keyes took his own life. He left a note, handwritten, but it answered nothing. No full confession, no complete list of victims, no map of where the remaining containers were buried, just silence. The same silence he had maintained his entire life. And that left investigators standing in front of a case that was simultaneously solved and unsolved. They had the man, but they never got the full truth. Because Keyes had spent years making sure that even if he was ever caught, he would still be the one holding the answers. Somewhere out there, in forests across the United States, there may still be containers buried underground, placed there years ago, by a man who is no longer alive to say where they are. How many victims were there? How many cases were never connected? How many containers are still waiting, somewhere in the ground? To this day, no one knows the full number. And that might be the most disturbing part of this entire story. Not what was discovered, but what was never found. This case never fully closed, and neither does the feeling it leaves behind. If this story hit you differently, you know what to do. Subscribe for the next one, drop a comment with your thoughts, we actually read them. And if someone in your life needs to hear a story like this, share it, because some stories deserve to be remembered.